Good morning again. I'm Joyce Gough. I am teaching Stamping 101. Like Linda said, I'm sure a lot of you are going, oh my God, I have been teaching or stamping for X number of years. Why is anybody teaching me Stamping 101? What could I possibly learn from this class that I don't know already? If at the end of this class you don't learn something, you let me know, because I challenge you to learn some things here and learn some things, not just about art, not about business, although those things will help you. Trust me, these things will help you. But I also call this class science class. So if you're like me, you might be into science, but I always think that art and science actually work well together. They have this symbiotic relationship that we should always think of to help facilitate each other. So in this class, I'm going to talk about my why I teach this class. And it's not just because I'm a consultant, but I teach this class because I was a customer for many years. So I'm going to talk about my why there, and why you need to think not only how this is going to help you, but how this is going to help all of your customers, especially your new customers. We're going to talk some about stamps, we're going to talk about inks, we're going to talk about paper, and how all of those things work, and some of the struggles that you guys might have. Can everybody hear me in the back okay? Okay, perfect. All right, so let's talk about my why. So many years ago, 1999, my sister called me up and invited me to a stamp party. And, I was heavily into math and science growing up. I was your typical nerd. I started out as an oceanography major in college and got bored with that, and also didn't swim. So figured maybe I should switch to something else. So I became a math major, and so I have a degree in math, and I started working in IT, and I've been working in IT ever since. Programming, managing IT work. I'm doing data conversion for the VA right now, so been working in IT for close to 30 years. So I am your bona fide nerd. So when my sister invited me to the stamp class, I'm thinking, I don't want to collect stamps. What, postage stamps? I'm not that kind of a nerd. And she says, no. It's like rubber stamps. You're stamping on paper and using inks and things. And I'm like, she says, just come, don't worry, you don't have to buy anything. And I said, okay, as long as I don't have to buy anything, cool. I was already tired of the Pampered Chef lingerie, blah, blah, blah. So, all right, now I'll go to have fun with my sister. Don't buy anything. Okay, so she picks me up and my other sister for the party. And as we're driving down to the party, she hands me this catalog. Anybody familiar with this one? Yep, way back 1999. So she says, just flip through the catalog. You'll see what the stamping thing is about. So I'm flipping and looking, and oh, these are cute. I don't know what I would do with this stuff. She goes, it's okay, just have fun. You don't have to buy anything. Good, because I'm not buying anything. And so we get to the party, and the hostess is lovely. She's got, refreshments out, and, she's just a nice woman, and I'm thinking, nice woman, not buying anything. The consultant, and it's Sherry Chilbert. I don't know if any of you know Sherry Chilbert. I know you do. So Sherry's just as nice as can be, and she's greeting everyone. She's doing all the right things as a consultant at a party. Lovely woman. And so she starts her demonstration. And she's showing the stamp of the month, and she's using the stamp of the month in her demonstration, and she's making a card. And then she did something that made me go, what are you doing? Anybody recognize this?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And you know what I thought? This is chemistry. Oh my God. How does that work? How does this powder work with this heat and make this crazy effect? I love it. Chemistry. Not buying anything. Sorry. Not doing it. So she goes on with her presentation and cute, nice. I like all the things. She makes the card for the hostess, gives that to her, and then she's talking about the other special. And the other special, I have to say, did me in. She had, so I am also a Noah's Ark fan. I love things Noah's Ark. I have these huge prints in my house that I collected over time, very expensive prints of Noah's Ark. And she showed this. Anybody remember this?
Yeah.
Yeah. This Noah's Ark. Yeah, you sure?
Super set.
Super set. With $150. You could get it for free. Oh my God, $150. I'm not buying anything, but oh my God, that and this.
Chemistry.
Maybe. So she starts passing out wish lists, and I start jotting some things down, and before you know it, I'm like, what am I doing? Wait, I have a 9-year-old son at home, or 10-year-old son at home. This one. This is something we can do together. So justification. That's right. That was my justification. So, $150 later, I ordered this. I ordered some primary color ink pads, some cards and envelopes, and a few other odds and ends. But I got this for free. So I was excited. A couple weeks later, my sister drops the order off from the hostess, and the weekend comes. I get him into the kitchen with me. We pull all the stuff out. Look, Joel, look at this stuff. We get it out. I don't know what to do. What am I doing? What do I do with this stuff? I had no idea what to do with any of this. I had some primary colors. I could stamp these outline images in primary colors, but then what? You know, I'm flipping through the catalog. Looks like they use on outline images black ink a lot and then color them in. Okay, I don't have that. Oh, embossing. This is exciting. But guess what I didn't have?
E-tool.
E-tool. So, I call up my sister. She says, how's it going with the stuff? Well, I don't really know what to do with it. She goes, yeah, she says, I could show you some things, but, I'm certainly not an expert. Okay. She goes, let's go to the craft store. So we go to the craft store. I get a black ink pad. I get a heat tool. And I get some other stamps. I get some markers. I go to town. Bring him with me, always a mistake. End up with probably close to $200 worth of stuff. But I had things I needed, right? Did I know how to use them? Let's see. So I get home, we take out all the stuff again, we start stamping. I still have my very first card I made. This is it. This is my card. This is the card I made. This is made from a set that I bought at the store. You can see my first attempt at stamping on the back. Yeah, it didn't go very well. I did put I was told you have to put a Hallmark stamp on the back. So I had this little chicken from the Dots book, this little A size. But yeah, I used decal scissors. I used markers, and I used some black and colored in, but not really what I wanted. So that was my lesson. I bought a bunch of stuff. I am now close to $300 in and didn't have a clue what to do. So I don't know if any of you have customers who have ever been in that boat. If you've ever had new customers who've bought things and not returned, perhaps that's why. But I was fortunate. One of the women at the party that I had gone to was a member of my church, and she used to manage a stamping store. So she heard about our plight, not just mine, but my sister's, and my mom wanted to get into the mix. And she said she would hold these classes. She wasn't charging anything for it. She says, I have all this stuff at home. She had a basement full of stuff just from working at the store and collecting other things over time, including Doc's things. So she started having classes at her house once a week or every 2 weeks, to teach us. I learned so much from that woman, I can't even tell you. I was lucky. I could have called the consultant, but Sherry, who was the consultant, had moved from our area up into Maryland, so it wasn't easy for her. And I knew that ahead of time. But I was able to learn and learn so much. And then we started going to rubber stamping conventions. And you learn much more because they're showing all these techniques with the latest goodies. And, I even met Tim Holtz way back then and didn't know who he was. And he probably, I know he wasn't nearly as famous as he is now. But, I bought some things from him. So I have a lot of things at home, and I've learned a lot, and I've been able to make use of that. But science for me is always in the back of my mind. Why things work the way they do help you with your art. So that's what I'm trying to impart in this class. So this is to help you, and this is to help your customers who were like me. Okay? So let's move on and talk about some of the things where we may have questions on. So let's first talk about stamps. So stamps. Stamps can come in two flavors. They're either mounted or unmounted. They can be made of rubber or polymer blend. So I don't know if you all have seen, so here's your typical, and I'll show. Here, I'll back up. This picture. So, this is a mounted stamp. It's on foam. The good ones are on foam to provide some give. They typically have nice detail to them. But they can also be mounted, on clear blocks with clear stamps. This is a very old stamp. I don't think they make this anymore. This is made by Provocraft. So, you can get them that way. Let's see, let me back up. Okay, so mounted stamps are permanently mounted on a block. Most of the time they're wood, but as I just showed you, they're not always. The better quality stamps have those trimmed edges so that, when you're inking, they're not, picking up so much ink on the block. You can get a better image that way. The advantages, obviously, they're ready to go. You can just grab and start using right away. Some would argue that they have more clarity for detailed images. And I would say there's probably a reason why. So with rubber, think about rubber. Rubber tends to be a little bit harder than the polymer, photopolymer, right? So when you're using rubber and you're pushing down, it allows for a little extra effort so as not to smear the image. Does that make sense? So that biology comes into play there, right? So you're pressing down, and yes, you can press it down hard enough to smush it and blur it. But typically with rubber, that's a little bit harder to do. So a lot of people, rubber all the way. I'm never using photopolymer because I get a much cleaner image. The details are much better, and it's all due to biology, honestly. The disadvantages, obviously the amount of storage, it takes up much more space to store mounted blocks. You need some kind of tool if you want perfect placement. Anybody remember that thingamajig?
Oh, I just found mine.
Yeah, I still have mine too. Yeah, so great use for that tool if you want perfect placement. The wood can stain, So, so let's move on to unmounted. So unmounted stamps are typically made of photopolymer blend or rubber. They can also be rubber. So let me show a quick picture of that. So, I mean, you all know our stamps, but this is a cling stamp. Anybody use these cling stamps? Yeah. So these have a vinyl backing. There's foam on it, but they have a vinyl backing, so they will stick to a block. They will stick to a stamping placement tool or positioning tool, but they are rubber. So those of you who are rubber purists, you can use these. And then you can get these raw rubber, and then you would just need to figure out how to mount it. You can put some, this like tacky glue on it, and they'll stick to your block, and you can take them off, or you can permanently mount them. But stamps can be bought either way. So again, they require a mount to use. The advantages: you don't need as much storage, which we all love with Close to My Heart, right? There's easier placement of your image because they're clear with that polymer blend. You can mount multiple images together, which you can't do with mounted stamps. And you can trim or position them as you feel like you need for your work. The disadvantages, the rubber does need that extra tool, so it goes back to the whole, can I see through it, see around it, etc. And polymer stamps, the perception is they stain more than rubber. Now my question for you all is, people get concerned about the staining. Why? That's what I don't understand, why people get concerned about that. I know there are ways around it. You can, stamp in a light color, you can stamp in Versamark before you stamp in a dark color, and your stamps are beautiful when you're done. But why? Stamps are tools, they're not treasures, and I want you guys to make that your mantra. These are tools, not treasures. Unless you're looking to, I'm going to use this for, this month, and then I'm going to sell it right away, and I'm going to tell the person it's new even though it's not. Yeah, I think there's other problems there. But yeah, I honestly think that, you should use your stamps, and when I look at my stamps and I see, this is used, I've used this before, thank God. I don't have 200 stamps out there that I haven't used. I want to see that I've used my stamps. So, good on me. I didn't buy it for no reason. The other thing that people have problems with is ink does bead up on polymer. It just does. If you're not getting a clear image, ink up your stamp and look at it, and you can see that the ink just starts to retract and it starts to bead up. So, and the reason for that is it's just the nature of what polymer is. It has less tendency to do it on rubber, but it still can do it on rubber too. So what you want to do, again, I know probably most of you know this, you want to season your stamp, you want to rub it on your arm, you want to rub it on your jeans, you want to, do whatever. You want to ink it up, stamp it off, ink it up, stamp it off, something. Twist, 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 tamp, tamp, tamp is the best way to get a clean image. But yes, Terry's making fun of me.
I'm not. I'm just walking down memory lane with you.
Yes, you are. So, all right, let's talk about other stamps. Foam stamps. Anybody have any old foam stamps?
I got rid of those.
Those were popular
horrible.
for a while. But you know, foam stamps, they can be unmounted or they can be mounted. They're typically used for non-paper type projects. So think of home decor. You know, those foam stamps are great to, you know, ink up a wall, or you know, something that you would use to make your house beautiful. So the advantages, they're, you know, inexpensive. They're typically really, really cheap. They're great for children. I mean, I know when he was little, that when my sister told me about stamping and ink, that's what I was thinking of. Those little foam rubber things that my son had for his color books and things. Okay, so and then they're great for acrylic inks or acrylic paints. Again, home decor. Think home decor. The disadvantages: the rubber's typically not, you know, because it's cheap. It's not trimmed very well, so it's harder to get a clean image. Just like the mounted stamps, you know, anything that's mounted that's foam will take up more space, but even if it's unmounted, it's going to get smushed unless you give it nice pristine space. So here's some examples. Here's a little foam stamp. This one's a hard foam stamp. This one is actually close to my heart, this little black heart that's on there. And then, you know, this one again is mounted, so it's got this foam back, but it's got a rubber front. But again, you're not going to get that clean image because it's just not trimmed very well.
Plus, it's not cut very deep into the rubber.
Exactly. And there's no foam backing behind it, behind the image itself. Handmade stamps. Anybody their own artist, designer, whatnot? So a few years back when I was just starting out and I got married, I was complaining to my husband that I needed a holly stamp with berries, and I didn't have one, so I was looking for one. So he's actually an artist. He's a CTO for a company, so he's very techie, but he's also very artistic, which I don't understand. But he made me this stamp here.
Wow. Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it stamps really nicely. My only complaint about it was it had a border, and I wanted to make a wreath with this.
Oops.
Thank you, honey. So that was really nice of him. But you know, so all you need is you know, the carving tools and rubber. There's, you know, obviously YouTube videos. You know, you can Google for those how-tos. But you know, if there's something you want to make, go for it. Questions on stamps? All right, I know this is what everybody wants to talk about, ink pads. Ink pads. Okay, so let's start with your dye-based, okay? Everybody love the new julep color?
Yes.
It's very pretty. I'm a green freak, so I love green. So dye-based. Dye-based is your general purpose ink pad. This is what you're going to use for most of your projects. Most of your ink pads should consist of dye-based ink. I know people have said this for many years. For those of you who haven't heard it, it absorbs into the paper. Why? Because it binds itself to the fibers of the paper. So it's going to sink down and bind itself inside that paper. It dries quickly. You can emboss it. It's not easy. You have to be quick. You don't have to be quick about the heating necessarily, but you have to be quick about getting the powder to the ink, because the ink or the powder has to stick to something. Powder has to stick to something. Anybody emboss on like tape or any other things besides ink? No? Just remember, embossing powder, as long as you put it on something that's sticky, it works. So think outside the box. So it's a dye-based ink. It's going to be made of these felt pads typically. It's a firm pad. If I touch it with my finger, I encourage everyone to do this. Touch it with my finger, what's going to happen? It's translucent, so you can basically see through it. But if I go wipe my finger, it's still there, right? Because it's dye. It dyed my finger. So that's what you have to remember. It's your dye-based ink. It's dye for a reason. It's binding to the fibers, and it's binding to my finger. The color on the pad, it's not necessarily representative. So this is green, but it doesn't look green, does it? So you can always tell a dye-based pad. If I lose my lid, this is my dye-based pad. A lot of times it will stamp splotchy. You guys, I know you guys have all seen that. I'm sure some of you have complained about it, but if you let it sit and dry, what happens? It smooths out because it's been given that time to dry and bind with the paper.
Chemistry.
Huh?
Chemistry.
Chemistry, that's right, chemistry. It's all about the chemistry. And physics too. So it cleans fairly well off your stamps, but there is some staining. But
Who cares?
who cares? Why?
Stamps are
Thank you. Tools not treasures. Tools not treasures.
You should get a ticket.
Some dye-based inks are waterproof, which is nice because you can use it for different techniques. But they do fade over time because they have sunk into your paper over time. Light, sun, can get them. So they're not a great choice for, home decor that's like sitting out in the sun. Lots of colors to choose from. Dye-based inks, because they're regular, everyday pad. There's always tons of colors to choose from. Our color palette is amazing. Questions on dye-based? Okay. Let's talk pigment. One thing I noticed, which this is the first time they've done this, so they've introduced the Julep pigment pad with the dye-based pad this time. But they changed the label. Anybody notice that?
Mm-hmm.
So it's much easier to see. So if you have pigment pads from the last year's idea book, they all look like this one. But then they changed the pigment ones to look like this. So much easier to tell. So they're vibrant. The colors tend to be way more vibrant, right? It's more like a paint consistency. So when you're stamping it on something, it's going to be thicker. And what does that do to your stamps? It gets down into those grooves. People hate cleaning them. But even though it's a pain to clean, does it stain your stamps at all?
I don't know. I don't use it.
No. So let's take another finger. Okay. So this is much more opaque. Again, if you've got pigment, try it. So this is much more opaque. And then if I go and oh, thank you. If I go white, yeah, thank you. Can I use the baby white?
It's not coming off.
Just doesn't work with paper. Thank you.
What about your jeans?
So I'm wiping both. Pigment gone. It doesn't stain your stamps. It's a pain to get off your stamps. Run them under water, get a toothbrush, do what you need to get them off, get it off, but it won't stain your stamps. So that's a bonus for those of you who care. So because it sits on the paper, on top of the paper, because it's a paint consistency, it's going to take a much longer time to dry because it hasn't sunk in. So that makes it easier to emboss. There's something for that embossing powder to stick to, and for a longer period of time. I can stamp a few images and then put the embossing powder on at the end instead of, let me quick, one at a time. The pad itself is spongy, to absorb that ink. The color, green, it looks like the ink, like what you're stamping. If you're putting pigment on a non-porous surface, which is a paper that's not going to absorb, so something like vellum, glossy cardstock, those sorts of things that are non-porous, you will need to heat set those. If you leave it out to dry, you can leave it out to dry for a year and it will still be wet. Trust me. I did an experiment one time. I'm big on experimenting.
Surprise.
I'm big on experimenting. I stamped an image on a piece of vellum and in pigment, and I put it in my car, and it was hot, like, you know, it was in the 90s and 100s. I left it in the car for a couple weeks. Every day I would take it out. Still wet. It was still wet. It just never dried. So must be heat set or embossed. We already talked about the fact that it's tough to clean off. It is water resistant, typically water resistant and fade resistant. So if you want to put that on your home decor in your house, good choice. It's a good choice for your scrapbook pages, you know, that aren't gonna, you know, fade over time. Okay. All right. Oh, let me like losing all my notes.
You're getting ready to explain why I hate the intense black, aren't you?
I'm going to get to all the inks that you guys are confused about, I promise. So let me, it's not showing all my notes. Okay. All right. Let's talk about solvent inks. Solvent inks are the ones that tend to be the most confusing to people. What ink do I use when, right? Dye and pigment, I think most everybody's probably picked up over time. Hopefully you've learned something in what I showed or talked about there, but solvent inks are probably the most confusing. So, back to this. These are the solvent inks, some of the solvent inks that we sell. So we've got this intense black, we've got this archival black, and we've got stays on jet black, right? So when would you want to use each of those? God bless you. So solvent ink is a permanent ink. It dries by evaporation, not saturation. It tends to be fade resistant, which is great for, you know, long projects that need to last for a long time. It doesn't bleed. Well, at least some of them don't bleed. So we'll talk about that in a minute. Some of them don't bleed. But you know, if you're looking to color something, forget about the dye, forget about the pigment. You need to talk about solvent, and I'll talk to you about which ones are good for using for coloring. They're designed for non-porous surfaces. So because they have such longevity, they're permanent. They're great for non-porous surfaces. They do stain your stamps. It's just the nature of the beast. You don't, and I know a lot of people are confused about this, you don't want to use those solvent cleaners on your polymer stamps. They will degrade. So those, like the Stays On cleaner, you can use it for other things, but you don't want to use it on your polymer stamps. So, and I will talk more about those black inks in a minute, so hold your questions about that. We'll talk more about those black inks and coloring in a second. I just want to go through the plethora of ink pads. Now, mind you, I might talk about some ink pads that we don't sell. Why would I want to do that? The reason I do that is because you all have customers. Your customers, as much as they love close to my heart, they're going to love a lot of other things out there, and they may come to you because they consider you the expert. And if they don't consider you the expert, they should be considering you the expert. So they should be taking questions to you, even if you don't sell it, and you want to be able to answer them if you can. Okay. You want to know what the competitors are out there, and what they're doing, and what they have to offer, and what you have that's comparable. You know, obviously you want to steer everyone in the direction of close to my heart, but the reality is you may not be able to do that. But if somebody comes to you with a question about a product that we don't sell, and you can help them with it, they may come buy other things from you, right? Because they're like, that woman knows what she's talking about. All right, so let's talk about some other specialty stamp pads. So watermark inks, you know, Versamark, And we used to sell clear embossing ink. I know I've got that here somewhere. Clear embossing ink. Oops. Although they both serve purposes, similar purposes, you know, they do have some differences. Okay, so let's talk about those. Watermark inks, they provide a watermark image. So, you know, if you're going to stamp it on your cardstock, it's just going to make a darker version of that color, and it will stay that way. Because especially with Versamark, it's a sticky ink. So it's just going to stay and adhere itself to your paper, and it's just going to leave that watermark. It's not just good for embossing. You know, if you want to do a subtle background, go for it. The stickiness of this ink acts as a glue. That's why it's great for embossing powders, and why it's a great dual purpose ink, and why not just we sell it, Stampin' Up sells it, you know, a lot of companies sell it because it's a great ink. Embossing ink, again, they typically have the same purposes, but they're less thick. They tend to be a little more liquidy, if you will, but they can also be tinted. So how many of you have used Versamark ink on white paper and want to emboss it and like, where did I stamp that? So tinted embossing inks are great for that. So you can ink up a lot of things. It'll stamp in light blue or light pink, but then when you throw the embossing powder on it, you can't see it. All good. All right, so let's talk about some other inks. We don't sell these either. Or we don't sell these. Versamagic, Color Box chalk ink, Big and Juicy, and Color Box. So these are just samples of what's out there, and I know a lot of people use these things. Chalk inks, they can be dye or pigment. So if somebody comes up and asks, I'm using this chalk ink pad, what do I do with it? Look at it. Is it a pigment? Is it a dye? You all have learned what dye and pigments do, so you can help them with that. Chalk inks tend to stamp bright. So I don't know if you all have ever tried chalk inks. They will stamp very bright, but then as they dry, they will have a very chalky finish. So it's a little deceiving, but it's in the name, chalk. It's going to look like chalk. So if you have a customer who asks you about that, that's what it's about. Rainbow or multicolor inks, again, they can be dye or pigment based, and some of them have the colors together. Usually the dye ones, they don't last very long, let me tell you by experience, but the good ones, the pigment ones, are separate colors. You can use them separately, or you can use them, you know, in whatever rainbow fashion they have. So all right, so let's talk about black inks. So we have 4 lovely black inks. We got your dye, we got your pigment, we got your intense black, and over here we've got archival black somewhere, I think. Or did I leave it over here? No, it's here. So I have the old one. So you've got all 4 of these ink pads. What do I do with them? Why would I need to use one over the other? Can't I just buy one? No. At least if you want some variety in your life, you need them. Okay, so let's talk about black dye ink. Black dye ink, again, goes back to what I said about dye. Your all-purpose ink. It's great for just regular stamping. You're not really doing anything with it. Stamp sentiments, blah, blah, blah. You can use colored pencils with them though. You just don't want to add water, anything liquid based, you know, regular colored pencils. You can use watercolor pencils, but don't use water. Just use the pencil. Black pigment ink, again, great for heat embossing, great for home decor, but again, will smear if you try to use something that adds water. Don't do it. The archival black ink, that's a solvent ink. Oops, no, this is it. So our archival black ink, it says on it that it's a premium dye ink. So it's a specialty dye ink, this archival black. It tends to be the blackest of all the ink pads we have. It is the blackest ink. It's great for scrapbooking and home decor because it's solvent ink, permanent. So it's great for that. You can use colored pencils, but again, you don't want to use anything with water because it will smear. I've tested and tested and retested. Even if you heat set it, it's still gonna smear. So anybody who wants to color with water, with alcohol, anything that's liquid based, this is your ink, Intense Black. This is the one. It's not the darkest. Archival Black is the darkest. This is the darkest. If you want to know how to get a darker image but still use coloring, we'll talk after. I can share some tricks with that. But if you're going to color, this is the one you want to use. This is a non-smearing ink. I do want to just suggest strongly that if you're going to color with a solvent ink, even though it's a non-smearing ink, just let it dry for a few minutes, heat set it, something. If you're too quick, it's gonna smear because it hasn't had time to dry. So it just needs time to dry. I don't know about you guys with your Intense Black, mine's kind of juicy. Yeah. So
almost too juicy.
Almost too juicy, yeah. So you wanna have a little bit of a lighter touch with it, but it, but then again, it doesn't always stamp the cleanest, but again, there's tricks for that. So, Intense Black for coloring with watercolor paints, watercolor pencils using water, alcohol markers, water-based markers, anything that adds water, you want to use this. Questions on black inks? Yes, Miss Ann?
We did not, we used to sell Memento.
And I will talk about Memento. Thank you for asking. So, Close to My Heart has a blog. I don't know if you all visit it. Go check out the blog. Take a picture of this if you want. They created this just recently. Darn, they stole my thunder. They stole my thunder in this blog. But they posted a blog post and they shared this PDF file in the blog post. Download it. Keep it with you. It talks about exactly the same things that I experimented on and found and said, yep, they got it right. So, go ahead and download that. All right, so let's talk about some black inks that one we sell, one we used to sell, and one we never sold. So, Memento Tuxedo Black, VersaFine Onyx Black, and Stays On Jet Black. These are very, very popular inks in the industry. And if you're having trouble with black inks, I guarantee you your customers are having trouble with black inks too. And they may not be using our inks. So it's a good idea to be able to help them and analogize them. Maybe they say, I ran out of my Memento ink, I'm at this crop. Do you sell something like it? This will help answer that question. All right, so let's talk about these. The Memento Tuxedo Black. It is a water-resistant ink. It's one of those that you can use. Just like the Intense Black, you can use this ink for the same purposes. In fact, that's why Close to My Heart introduced it when they brought Shin-Hand markers into the mix. Because this was something that you could color with. But again, I've had people use this and say, oh, it smears. It's because they did not heat set it. You gotta heat set it, you gotta give it time to dry. That is the key. So.
Are those, I never had a problem with my Tuxedo Black smearing, but is that because I gave it enough time to dry?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So you don't have to heat set it if you've got time to
if
walk
you
away.
let it, if you have time to walk away, walk away. I mean, it doesn't take too long, but the woman I told you about, the rubber stamping, the one who managed the rubber stamping store, she came to me one day. She says, I have Memento ink. I'm using alcohol markers and it's smearing. She came to me. Talk about an ironic twist of events. So I told her that. Yes, that's the one, Terry. So I told her about this. You gotta let it heat set. Now, let's talk about this Onyx Black VersaFine. Anybody use this ink? Kathy, I know does. I'm going to tell you this little secret. This is my favorite black ink in the world. I wish we sold it so I could share it with the world, but I love this black ink because it does a lot of things that the other inks don't do. It's like your best package black ink. This is an oil-based ink. It's an oil-based pigment ink. So what happens when you combine it with water? It doesn't combine, right? It resists each other. Oil and water don't mix. We all know that from kindergarten. Oil and water don't mix. So, this is great for coloring. It's great. If you do nothing else, go just get one and experiment with it. You can get it at any craft store, I promise.
Oh, okay.
They sell it everywhere because it is popular, and it's popular for a reason. Take a detail stamp, stamp it in stamp it in all 4 of our black inks, and then stamp it in this, and see what the details are like on this versus everything else we have. I love this black ink. It stamps really dark, so it satisfies both the archival black and the intense black. It stamps very dark. So yeah, I know you don't want to use these with your customers because we don't sell them, but for your own personal projects, great choice. And because it's also pigment, you can emboss with it. I remember sharing with Kathy that I didn't think you could emboss with it because it dried too quickly for me. The reason it dried too quickly for me was because I had a dry ink pad.
Ah.
Once I got a brand new one, no problem. No problem. So again, you can use all those watercolor type mediums with this that you want. So to me, I hate to say it, this is the best one. Stays on. Stays on. Anybody use Stays on very much? Yes, no?
No.
No. Why don't you use Stays on, Terry?
Because I already had 4 black ink pads and I
Okay.
didn't think I needed another one.
Anybody have any problems with Stays on that they don't like?
Slippery.
It's slippery. It is slippery. It's very slippery. It has an odor, right? It definitely has an odor. But it's great if you want to stamp on wine bottles or, acetate. It's great for those types of surfaces because it stays on. So what's it gonna do? It's gonna stay on. It stays on. So it stays on for a reason. Now it does take a few minutes to dry. That's okay. You're just gonna let it dry. It is slippery. But what you can do, if you mess up, if you're quick, you can just wipe it off and try again. So it's great for that. But what does it do? It stains your stamps because stays on.
Stays on.
So if you care about that, and it stays, it stains your stamps.
Really badly.
Awful,
Yeah.
awful. But they're,
Tools, not treasures.
thank you, tools not treasures, so we don't care.
Well, we care because you can't see through them anymore.
Depending on, that's true, depending on how much you use them, that's true.
But you
Yeah.
also need to see around the stamp, not necessarily.
That's right, through it.
the stamp.
Depending on the detail.
Yep, yep. So you wanna pick and choose.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about white inks. White inks are always confuzzling to people too. There's dye inks, there's pigment inks, and dye inks, why would anybody wanna use white? And, some whites are better than others, and yeah, all that's true. But, let's talk about, some things that I've, why did I put that? I don't know. Okay, I think I copied and pasted something wrong. All right, so we sell at Close to My Heart. We sell wherever it went. Here. We currently sell this pigment ink. Anybody use it? White pigment? Good stuff, good stuff. Is it the best white pigment in the industry? It's okay. It's okay. It works. How many of you have the old dye base and hated it and threw it away? You threw yours away?
I did.
Sorry to hear that. Sorry to hear that. You're gonna use it today.
Oh, okay.
So our dye base, this dye based ink, white ink pad, I even have, I think, the old flip one, retired. It retired on shore because everybody, their mothers, sisters, brothers complained about it. Said, why are we selling this close to my heart? This is not doing what I needed to do. So they didn't keep it in our inventory and they replaced it with a pigment ink, which seemed to be what most people wanted. Okay, that's fine. Dye-based inks do work. It depends on what you want to use them for. If you stamp them on light colored cardstock, if you're standing right in front of it, you won't be able to see. You turn it sideways, it's like magic. There's a pattern there. Oh my God, it's very subtle. That's what you want? It's a great ink for that. If you stamp it on dark cardstock, you can see it, but it's kind of subtle. So you'll see that today. Pigment ink, that's what most people want with white, is it's gonna show on all colors of your cardstock. But because it's pigment, it's gonna have a bit of a chalky appearance, which it kind of goes hand in hand with white, but you know, it does have a chalky appearance. But you can also, because it's pigment, you can emboss with it, so it will show up better and you can emboss with it. So, you know, it seems to meet the needs of most people. Let's talk about another set of ink pads that is very, very popular out on the market, but we don't sell. But I wouldn't be surprised if you had customers who ask you about this ink occasionally. Anybody know what I'm gonna mention? Because it's so popular.
Distress ink.
Ding, ding, ding to Kathy. Distress inks.
Oh, Tim Holtz.
Tim Holtz Distress Inks. They are, I don't think you can watch a YouTube video without seeing Distress Inks on it, honestly. So they're great inks. I own some. Remember I met Tim Holtz way back when? Black soot and whatever dark colors he was selling back then, because there was only like 4 or 5. And I bought them with some stays on black ink, and he showed some fun techniques, wonderful. Weren't really my style, but now they have all these wonderful colors. So let's talk about these two so that you guys know about these when your customers ask. So there is the just regular Ranger Distress ink. It's a dye-based ink, so that's important. It's a dye-based ink. It reacts with water. Remember, you're not using dye ink with water products like watercolor paints or anything like that, because they will smear. Well, that works to the advantage. They took advantage of that property with this distress ink, this dye-based ink, because it reacts with water. So you can do wonderful techniques. You know, you can do all sorts of blending, you can spatter water on it and it leaves these water stains. It's great. You can, you know, smash it on your words are hard.
That thing that rolls out.
Craft mat. Thank you, craft mat. You can use some and pick up with a water brush and paint with it. It's great for water techniques. Doesn't stamp the best. It's like the bottom of the barrel for stamping for dye-based inks, because it just doesn't stamp that well. It just, you know, it looks like it's beaded up, you know, but that's not the purpose of the ink. So, if you have a customer that says, I bought this distress ink and it's not stamping very well, that's why. You got it. You have the info.
So, question.
Yes.
Because our re-inkers are dye-based inks. So
Yes.
you can do that, all of those same techniques with
Yes,
our re-inkers.
yes, absolutely.
You don't need those, you don't need that competitive.
No, you don't. And in fact, you can even use our ink pads to do the same thing. You know, you can use our ink pads to, you know, but the blending is what they have over our regular dye-based inks. The blending is phenomenal. But one thing they noticed with those water-based distress inks was, even though they blend very well, you can't layer colors on top of each other because they settle into the paper, and then you start creating mud, and it's gross. So they invented this oxide ink. Oxide inks are like everybody's top favorite right now.
Holy grail.
You can't, you can't throw a rock without hitting distress oxide ink somewhere. It is a combination of dye and pigment ink. It's not your typical hybrid pad, but it's a combination of dye and pigment. So they took the best of what that distress ink was, and they added some pigment properties to it. So it stamps opaque. It does stamp though, and it stamps really, really nice. It does have a chalky finish because it's pigment. Pigment's gonna have that chalky finish. But because it also has that dye base, it reacts with water. So it's different than your regular pigment. You know, if you take pigment and you splatter water on it, it's not really gonna do a whole lot. It's not really gonna move. But because it has this combination of the dye, it's gonna move around. So it's gonna separate for that water much better. So it is phenomenal for techniques, and it blends beautifully. It's just a great ink. And you know, I don't know who invented it on their team, but they did a great job.
So what can we recommend when people say, I only use distress oxide ink?
You would
I have a lot of friends that only use distress oxide.
So so I don't know that you're gonna sell anybody, but you would want to find out what they want to do that maybe the distress oxide doesn't do. You know, what are they trying to do? Yeah. Because I mean, you know, you're not gonna have your good black. You know, they have black soot, but it's it's not your black. You know, so it just depends on what they want to do. See, I would pick their brain. I would just pick their brain, saying, okay, you use this, you know, what can I help you with? What kind of project are you working on that I can help you with? All right. Any other questions about inks before we move on to paper? Yes, ma'am.
I missed it. Back when you were talking about permanent ink, you said, it'll stain the stamp. Don't clean it with
The solvent cleaners. So like the Stays-On cleaner, you don't want to clean your polymer with it. I think it's fine on rubber, but not on the polymer. It really degrades that polymer. Okay, all right, let's talk about paper. Everybody have all our beautiful color paper? I love our paper. All right, let's talk about cardstock. So here's a card I just made with cardstock. You can just use cardstock. Just reminding everyone, you can just use cardstock. Cardstock is your sturdy paper. It's thicker than regular paper, right? Let's see, I took some, here we go. This is what I wanted. So I have math. So
Nerd.
cardstock is measured by,
Sorry.
I take that with pride, Terry.
You should.
Cardstock is measured by cover weight, what's called cover weight in the paper industry, okay? So it can typically be 65 pounds to 110 pounds. Sometimes there can be paper out there that's more, but you know, for our crafting purposes, those are usually the poundages that you hear about. Our white daisy and our old colonial white, 80 pounds, so they were thicker. So when you guys put this stuff on your Cricut mat, and it's rolling up and it's harder to peel off, that's why. It's a thicker weight paper than the thinner paper that tends to come off a little bit easier, although sometimes that tears too. So our craft paper, 74 pounds. Our other color, 65 pounds. So what does that mean? What does that poundage mean? So the weight is for cover. This is only for cover weight. The weight for cover weight is how much a stack of 500 parent sheets weigh. So 500 is considered a ream, and then parent sheets for cover stock is 20 inches by 26 inches. So if you're thinking about these large sheets, 500 of them, how much does that weigh? So if you're weighing our white daisy and our colonial white, based on that size, that many sheets, it's gonna be 80 pounds to pick up. Make sense? So the heavier paper, I mean, if you think about it, you're not gonna get as, you know, as many. Those tend to be higher quality and thus higher price, right? Okay. So typically your regular cardstock is gonna be non-coated. It can be dyed all the way through, or like ours, just printed on the sides and have that white core. This is where you're gonna get all your lovely colors because it's dyed. And it can be textured. I still hoard my old textured paper because it does have this high quality appeal that I just love about textured paper. So that's the story on cardstock. So let's talk about pattern paper. Woohoo!
Where did the birdhouse come from?
Oh, this was an old stamp of the month.
eBay.
All right, so pattern paper obviously tends to be lighter weight. It's thicker than printer paper typically. Although there's probably some cheap stuff out there that's about like that. But but obviously it's thinner than cardstock. And because it's thinner than cardstock, it's not considered cover weight, it's considered text weight. So text weight paper is weighed differently. So it sounds weird that our cardstock is 80 pounds, did I say? Yeah, 80 pounds. And our text weight is 100 pounds. Sounds like it's heavier, it's not.
There's more parent sheets.
There's more sheets. So the text weight for the parent sheets for text weight paper are 25 inches by 38 inches. So they're much larger. Why they are that way in the industry, I don't know. I don't know that there's any science behind it, so I didn't bother to look. But that's the deal. That's the deal. So text weight, different than cover weight. So ours is 100 pounds, and I'll talk how I know what ours are in a second. Obviously we use them for backgrounds, our lightweight projects. There's coordinating colors, which are nice. The patterns help facilitate our designs. And, you know, of course they're white in the middle because they're just paper. So glossy paper. Glossy paper is just a version of cardstock. And I'm not going to talk about all these different versions of cardstock. There's glitter paper, there's, what were some of the other ones I was thinking of? You know, they're all just different flavors of specialty cardstock. This one I bring up because glossy is great for techniques. It has that shiny appearance and you can do some fun things with it. It is slick, which makes it non-porous. So keep in mind all those ink things that I explained earlier, because we're working with non-porous paper, which is different than our cardstock. You want to take all of that into account about heat setting, what kinds of inks to use, blah, blah, blah. Usually they're white, but they can come in other colors. All right. Let's talk about vellum. So vellum, here's vellum. Vellum. Has anybody made a card out of vellum, out of our vellum? You can make a card base out of vellum. It works. Who thought? So vellum is translucent paper. You can see through it. And when you make a card base, you want to keep that in mind because whatever you put on the front, you kind of want to take into account the back. So you're not looking at ugly adhesive or something you colored through and, oh, I can see that there. Some have prints on them. We've had prints on some of our specialty packs in the past. They add elegance. I think people tend to forget about vellum for things. Use your vellum. They're very elegant. Use them for card bases, like I said. if you've got a bright background and you put some other things on your project and you're like, oh my God, this is just too much, layer a piece of vellum on top of it. It will just beautifully subdue it, and all of a sudden you've got a brand new wow card, because it just looks very elegant. Again, non-porous, so you want to take all those ink tricks I mentioned, heat set, emboss it. Be careful if you're adding heat to it. It's thin, it will burn quickly. So just make sure your heat tool is heated up very well before you start, and then, you know, be careful, take your time embossing. Yes, ma'am.
Someone put on the corporate page yesterday that they heated their vellum to emboss it by putting it on a sheet in their oven. It's on the corporate.
Really?
On the corporate consultant page.
And it worked?
And it worked. It was like 175 degrees Fahrenheit.
How long did it take?
I can look it up.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm interested.
There you go.
Science.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you need to find out who that person is.
175 for 22 minutes, and she did a little strip. So she was talking about using it for Christmas cards.
Neat. All right, did everybody hear that?
So
That's cool.
There's
275. Awesome.
It's on the page.
I was
Nice.
gonna
Everybody
say, I
can
don't
look
think
at it
my
later.
oven goes down to 175. Okay.
Interesting concept. Put it in your oven. Anyway,
Might
I'm
keep
sorry.
it-
No. Good tip. Thank you.
Might
So-
keep it from curling.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good point, Kathy. It might keep it from curling. So, what I want to say is, I've seen vellum kind of come and go in our inventory, and I suspect what happens is people scream, "Why don't we sell vellum? Why don't we sell vellum?" And they bring vellum in, and then some people use it, and most people buy it, and then just leave it sit and don't do anything with it. And then what happens? Close to my heart says, "Oh, it's not selling. Let's get rid of it." So, use your vellum. Use it. It's beautiful. Use it.
Yeah, colored pencils on the back.
Colored
side
pencils
of
on
it,
the
too.
back, markers on the back. Yeah, all that stuff. Good for techniques. Okay. Craft paper.
Joyce,
Yes, ma'am.
one with do you have a preferred tape or?
So that's always the question, isn't it? So that is the question with vellum. I personally, anytime I use vellum and I want the whole thing to stick, I use my Xyron. Because a Xyron, if you run it through one of those Xyron sticker things, it's gonna put an even coat of glue across the back. And it will stick beautifully. But if you don't wanna do that, you know, you have to think through, you know, where am I stamping? Where can I put glue on the back so it's not gonna be visible? Yeah, exactly. You can put brads, or, you know, I know brads are out of style, but, you know.
They're gonna come back.
They'll come back,
I'm
that's
already
right,
in line
Brad.
for the
I'm waiting
comeback.
for eyelets. Come on, eyelets.
Keeping my crocodile just in case.
Right. All right, so let's talk about craft paper. This is another one. This is a beautiful item that we sell, and it's great for techniques. How many of you have craft and it's just sitting gathering dust? Oh my God, get that stuff out. Let's use this. Let's talk about craft paper.
But mine feels really thin. Like, it feels a lot thinner than our regular cardstock. But it is close to my. It's close to my
It
heart.
is thinner. Remember I said it was what, 74 pounds?
But you said it was.
Oh, it's heavier than the colored cardstock.
Mine
But
is
lighter.
like
Paper thin?
floppy. Yeah.
Oh, let me see your craft. Come to my house.
Terry, mine is
Come
too.
to my house.
Is it, did you buy it
Really?
recently? Because I think I've had mine for a couple of
I've
years.
had mine a while too.
Okay.
I've had mine a while. I love mine.
I just used it this week and it was like.
Check.
Yeah.
Can I feel it? Yeah, that's definitely different than what I have.
Interesting. So then you have to change it over time. Craft paper. German for force and strength. That's a. Terry lived in Germany. Sorry, I had to pick on Terry because she lived.
But you have to say it the proper German way. Kraft.
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 So it's Kraft. German for force and strength. I'm German actually. So the difference between this and other cardstock is it can use any kind of wood. You know, the other types of cardstock, you know, they're very specific on what types of woods they use, but not craft. They can use anything. So that makes, and because of that, they're very self-sustaining. They use chemicals in the production of craft paper that they can reuse and reuse and reuse. So what does that mean? Great for the environment, right? Great for the environment. Use the craft. Take it out of your bin. Use it. It's great. Some have prints. We've had craft cardstock with prints in some of our collections in the past, right? It just has this unique look to it. I love it. I love coloring pencils on it, you know, embossing and then coloring pencils. You know, grab white pencils. You can just use white pencils on it. It's beautiful. So, you know, take it out and use it. Challenge yourself. That's what I want you all to do today. Challenge yourself to use some of these things. Now that you understand why they're there. All right, let's talk about another one that tends to confuse people. Watercolor paper. People throw around words like hot press, cold press, tooth, no tooth. What does all that mean? So let's talk about watercolor paper.
That is a gorgeous card, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Did you make that?
So let's talk about watercolor paper. Watercolor paper uses some amount of cottons that it takes and entwines it into the underlying fibers of the paper. It does that because they want you to be able to use it to absorb water. So, anybody ever try using regular cardstock and water on it? What happens? It seeps through, it starts to pill up, you can see it on the back. Does not happen with watercolor paper. So, let's talk about the whys and wherefores. Okay, so hot press paper. When they roll the paper through the rollers to, you know, as they're creating the paper, they press it at this high temperature, and that's what makes it the hot press. That high temperature. So if you want to remember, I know you're not going to want to remember high pressure, temperature, blah 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 blah, but just think about it. If you take something and run a hot iron on it, what happens? It's smooth. So that's the deal with hot press paper. It is smooth. You guys, we don't sell hot press paper, and let me tell you, it's hard to find in a craft store too. You have to either go to a specialty paper store or order it online. This is Arches. I wanted to bring this so you guys could check it out. This is hot press paper. It is smooth. So you can see the difference between what most people use, which is cold press paper. They like the texture. But, you know, come up and check it out. I'll put it up here so you guys can look at it. So think about an iron. If anybody asks you, you know, what's the difference between hot press and cold press? You don't need to necessarily go into the science and the production and all that, but the texture is what is key. Okay? Think of the iron. Because it's smooth, you can see that high level of brush detail. So for anybody who's an artist, that might be important to them so that you can show off your brush detail and what you can do. Similar to those who are painters, you know, true watercolor painters. But it is less absorbent as a result. So, you know, if you're using it, you make a mistake, you can add a little bit of water, dab it off, and it will pick up the paint fairly easy, as opposed to the grooves of cold press. So cold press, it's run through the rollers at cold temperatures. So for another analogy for cold press, when I get cold, I get goosebumps, right? So there's some texture on my arms. So same with the texture of the paper, cold, goosebumps. So just try to keep that in mind. So that's considered having a tooth, where the hot press, no tooth. It is the most popular, and it's popular because it's pretty. It looks really cool when you watercolor on watercolor, you know, cold press watercolor paper. It's just lovely.
We're gonna see that this afternoon.
Yeah, there you go. Hopefully I didn't steal any thunder from you.
No,
No,
this
okay.
is good.
Okay.
I'll talk about why I like cold press better.
Okay. Fair enough, fair enough. Gosh, what did I do with that one? Oh well, I guess it's not important. All right, so it is more absorbent. So if you make a mistake, it's a little tougher to fix. Not that it's not fixable, but it's a little bit tougher. You have to work at it a little bit more. Questions on watercolor paper, because I know that one tends to confuse folks. Am I taking a lot of time? Am I okay?
Always okay.
All right.
Tweaking in my mind.
All right, I'm gonna bring up, I know there's other kind of paper out there, but I wanna bring up some that customers tend to ask me about, and maybe they ask you about. Anybody work with mulberry paper?
Oh, not in a long time.
Mulberry paper, yeah, probably not a while. Mulberry, yes, we did. We used to carry it. Mulberry paper, yeah. So if you look at the image here, and I know I've got the sample here somewhere, but I don't know what I did with it. Anyway, you can see, you know, kind of this background. I actually printed on this piece of mulberry paper with my printer, and I took a wet brush and just kind of outlined it and tore it, and you get that beautiful wispy kind of look. You will have the same issue though that you have with vellum. So your adhesive is going to show through. So again, Zyron, good friend. Zyron and I go way back. It's made from mulberry tree wood. That's why it's called mulberry paper. It's a form of handmade paper. So no two pieces are going to be alike because because of the fibers that are in it. No two pieces are going to be alike. It does have some texture. Now some of them have more texture than others. And the weights can be, you know, different, but again, it all goes back to the fact that it's handmade paper. But it does come in a lot of colors. I tend to use white a lot, but you know, there are certainly other colors because you can dye that paper. And it's just great for stamping, printing like I did on the sample, and just, you know, having that beautiful soft background. One other thing which I thought was here. Joel, where did I put it?
Yeah, that's the bucket.
Ah, here. Okay, let's talk about one last paper that's on the market, and it's all the rage because of Ranger again, and the distress inks, and blah, blah, blah. It's the exact opposite of the paper that we're talking about here. Anybody know? Ding, ding, ding. Yupo paper. Yupo paper is a synthetic paper. I'm gonna put this out. It's a synthetic paper. It's not made from anything natural. It doesn't tear at all. But it is 100% recyclable, which is great if you want to recycle your project, because you didn't like it. It is waterproof and smooth. So if you put inks and things on it, they will just start to flow out, bleed out, because it's got this smooth surface. So it's great for those kind of loose painting, you know, throwing inkers on, and, you know, just letting them go to town. They're great for, this is great for doing those crazy colored backgrounds that, you know, have no rhyme or reason, and no two pieces are gonna look alike because you're just having fun with mediums, ink mediums. You want to avoid touching them if possible. See, I'm touching them. Because the oils of your fingers will get on this, and so, you know, that will affect what you're doing, and, you know, you'll be able to see some of your fingerprints and things. So really, you just want to use a paper towel if you're working with this stuff. So customers again may ask about Yupo paper because it is really popular with all these fun techniques that people love to do. All right, any questions on any of the papers before I finish up here? Okay, let's talk about safety standards. People get confused about this a lot too. What does acid-free mean? What does lignin-free mean? Blah, blah, blah. All right, so acid-free. Acid-free means somebody has taken the paper and they've removed the acid content from the paper. Why is that important? Because the acid tends to degrade your project over time. If you think about newspapers have this really, really low pH level, and so if you stick a newspaper on a project and you let it sit, it's gonna yellow. It's over time, if you touch it, it's just gonna kind of fall apart, because it's made to just be this low quality, quick way of disseminating news. It's not meant for projects. But for us who scrapbook and even make cards or other projects, we care. We want our stuff to last forever. We don't want them falling apart, whatever. We don't want anybody throwing away our project either, so we want to make sure they're good quality. So the pH is what neutralizes the acid. So the higher the pH level of your paper, the longer it's going to last. And so, whenever you're buying paper, you want to look to make sure it's acid-free, but quite frankly, in this day and age, for crafters, you'd be hard-pressed to find any paper that isn't acid-free. Lignin. So lignin-free means, lignin is the element in that wood pulp. So it's in the wood pulp that's in your papers that binds those fibers of your paper. And because of that lignin, the acidity level goes up. So when you see something that's lignin-free, it's because they've removed that lignin, it's a hard word to say, from the paper. But it does cost more to make things lignin-free. So, I'm sure that gets balanced into the cost of production, but it's something to keep in mind, because it goes hand in hand with the acid-free aspect. Make sense? Okay. All right. Buffered. So buffered paper contains this alkaline substance to counteract those acids. So, which makes sense. If you think of the word buffered, it's going to keep the acid away, right? And that buffered element is usually this calcium carbonate, and which is kind of chalk. So that usually gets added. Are you okay? Do you need to stand up?
No, I'm trying to read
Okay.
the bottom line.
Okay. And then PVC free, and close to my heart also talks about PVC free. So if you think about like our envelopes and things, things that are vinyl, PVC is kind of bordering on poison. It's in a lot of plastics. So it again can become unstable, it deteriorates, and it can mess up your photos. So it's something that when you're looking to buy some things, look at that as well. If you see that term, it's a good thing. All right. How many of you know about this page on our consultant website? If you go to Home, Communications, Frequently Asked Questions, Close to My Heart Products FAQ. That's where you can find things about acid-free, lignin-free, the weights of our cardstock, talks about all of our products. Become familiar with that page. This is something you should know, inhale, institutionalize, so you can have that information at the ready for your customers. Questions? Is there somebody in here that learned nothing today? Okay, then I did my job.